What is mentioned in the Quran about embryology is correct? If yes, then why and how? Who was Professor Keith Moore? And why did he say that the Quran is not a book written by man? Did he really find mistakes in the Quran? If he was a non-Muslim, why did he say this?
It is clear to me that these statements must have come to Muhammad from God or Allah, because almost all of this knowledge was not discovered until many centuries later.
We will explain all these questions in detail, but first we will talk about Professor Keith Moore. Keith Moore is a well-known Canadian anatomist and Professor Emeritus in the Division of Anatomy in the Faculty of Surgery at the University of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. His work and contributions are particularly significant in the fields of anatomy and embryology. One of Keith Moore's most significant contributions to the medical field was his work as an author. He penned several important medical textbooks with clinically oriented anatomy and the developing human. The purpose of giving a little background on him was to give you an idea of how great a scientist he was and how important his words were. Now we will talk about the aspect of his life in which he compared the science and Quranic verses. It was at this time that the Arabs brought some verses from the Quran to Professor Keith Moore, as he was the greatest scientist of embryology and anatomy at that time. As the Quran teaches that which you do not know, refer to those who have knowledge. In the same way, these people followed this verse of the Quran, Surah Nahl, chapter 16, verse 43. Whenever we raised any messengers before you, they were no other than human beings, except that to them we sent revelation. So, ask those who possess knowledge if you do not know. When Quranic verses about embryology were brought to the professor, he started researching them and finally came to the conclusion that what is contained in these Quranic verses is exactly in accordance with the current knowledge of embryology and is 100% correct. But there are some verses about which nothing can be said whether they are correct or incorrect, because some verses speak of knowledge that has not yet been discovered in the field of embryology, such as Surah Iqra, chapter 96, verse 2. Read in the name of your Lord, who created man from a clot of congealed blood. But it is worth noting that congealed blood has another meaning in Arabic grammar, which is called leech. Keith Moore said, I don't know if a baby in the embryonic stage is like something like a leech. So Professor Keith Moore went into his laboratory and looked inside a powerful microscope and took a picture of a leech and compared it to an embryo. He was surprised to see that there was no difference between the two. And he was also amazed at how these things could be written in the Quran 1400 years ago. The professor was asked about the same questions, to which he said that if you had asked me these questions 30 years ago, I could not have given more than 50% answers, because embryology is a new branch which has been developed in the field of medicine. Similarly, there were many verses that inspired Professor Keith Moore. Now we will explain all these verses in detail. God says in Surah Al-Tariq, chapter 86, verse 5, 7, So let man observe from what he was created. He was created from a fluid, ejected, emerging from between the backbone and the ribs, a drop of fluid that drips from between the spine and rib cage. What is the meaning of this? The science gives us the answer that the human genitals are formed in the embryonic stage at the place where the kidney is, that is between the spinal cord and the 11th and 12th ribs. Many people raise questions related to this verse. We will make a separate video on this verse in detail. So let's go ahead. God says, Sajda, chapter 32, verse 8, we have created you from sulala. Sulala in Arabic means the best part of the whole. Now, if we look at the same verse from a scientific point of view, we know that a man releases about 300 million sperms at the time of ejaculation, but only one sperm out of these 300 million is enough for fertilization. Now we have to think why this sperm is called the best part in the Quran. Surah Al-Insan, chapter 76, verse 2. We have given human being the ability to hear and see. The meaning of this verse is that the ability to hear first develops in a person and then to see. Today, after the advancement of science, we know that the baby's ear starts forming on the 22nd day in the mother's womb, which completes in the 5th month. and in the 7th month the eye opens. Surah Al-Najm, chapter 53, verse 45, 46. We have created human in pairs, male and female, from a drop that comes from man. Means the sex of a person depends on the man's sperm. Science also says exactly that the sex of a person depends on the man's sperm, and if the 23rd chromosome X participates at the time of fertilization, a girl is born, and if Y participates, a boy is born. If you are enjoying the video, then subscribe the channel, and if you have any question, you can ask in comment section. Surah Al-Zamr, chapter 39, verse 6. We created man in the mother's womb from one stage to another in the 3 folds of darkness. Professor Keith Moore said that these 3 folds of darkness mean 3 embryonic stages: anterior abdominal wall, datura wall, and amnion membrane, and mentioned in detail in Surah Mu'minun chapter 23, verses 12-14. First, the Quran says that we created man from sperm and kept him in a safe place. Science today says that the baby in the mother's womb is protected by the spinal cord, anterior abdominal wall, and other parts. Then the Quran says that we created man in alaka. Alaka has 3 meanings: leech, blood clot, and to cling. We have already described leech. Another meaning is blood clot, about which science says that in the beginning blood circulation does not start in the baby and blood does not start flowing in the veins. At this stage it looks like a blood clot. The 3rd meaning is hanging by glue. Similarly, today science also says that the child is attached to the wall of the mother's womb. So, all 3 meanings of the word alaka in the Quran are scientifically correct. According to the Quran, then alaka becomes mujga, which means something chewed. Professor Keith Moore took a piece of soft plastic and chewed it with his teeth, and when he pulled it out, he saw that it had teeth marks that resembled nerves. Then mudga becomes izama, which means bone, and then laham, which means flesh, is added to the bone, and thus God creates a new living being. When all these verses were put before Keith Moore, he added the new information he found in the Quran regarding embryology in his book, The Developing Human, due to which he got the award, the best medical book written by a single author. This is the reason why he said, after his thorough research, that it cannot be a book written by a man, and I have no doubt that this book is from God, and Hazrat Muhammad is his messenger.
It has been a great pleasure for me to help clarify statements in the Quran about human development. It is clear to me that these statements must have come to Muhammad from God or Allah, because almost all of this knowledge was not discovered until many centuries later. This proves to me that Muhammad must have been a messenger of God or Allah.